Good evening, everyone. Thank you all for coming here after a very busy day at CPDP. I'm very happy to introduce this panel, and I'm very thankful to the CPDP organizers and, of course, my co-panelists for accepting to join in this panel and presenting it at CPDP. The inspiration came from attending last year. I thought presenting some of the work that we're doing in the data governance of food systems and agriculture could be a very good complement to what many data scholars speak about at CPDP. So I think we can start with the slides here. I will introduce our panelists. So our first panelist is Monia Sovegard. She's from the University of Bonn. She's a PhD. This one? Maybe I need to speak more into it. Can you hear this? Sorry?
Can you see
the volume?
It's okay.
Okay. Can you hear me now? I think they heard you in back. Yes. So our first panelist is Monia Sovegard. She's a PhD researcher at the University of Bonn, and she will present the first structure of our panel. And after that, we'll have Can Atik, a postdoc at the University at Wageningen University and Research, who will explain the policy aspect of data governance. Following that, we will have Elena Spolidoro, who is from the Dutch Ministry of Agriculture, and she'll speak a little bit more on the application of the Data Governance Act, the Data Act in agriculture in the Netherlands. And finally, we'll have Seth van Holland, who is from DG Agri on the data governance unit there, and he will give a little bit more of a European perspective. All our panelists will speak for roughly around 10 minutes, and then we'll have a discussion. If you have a burning question, you may raise your hand and ask it after the panelists. If not, we will kindly ask you to save your questions for the discussion at the end. Thank you so much. Monia. Yes.
Yeah, first of all, thank you to the organizing team and also especially to you, Pia. It was the green button, right? Yeah, okay. I'm very excited to present my work today, Digital Platforms in the Agricultural Sector, Dynamics of Oligopolistic Platformization. This work was published in December of last year. And I hope this gives you some insights into the role of data in digital agriculture and also why digital agriculture might be a unique case when it comes to regulation. So digital agriculture is often portrayed as a technological solution to global challenges like food insecurity, climate change, and resource inefficiencies. And digital agriculture often envisions a fully connected farm where, for example, a combine harvester, you can see here, collects yield data, where soil sensors monitor moisture levels and drones assess crop health. And in this ideal scenario, all this data would stream into a centralized platform and then enable the farmer to make some decision support. But what we can actually see in practice is that there's a high degree of fragmentation and that this type of interoperability between these technologies does not take place. So farmers have to live with consequences like machinery not talking to each other. So for example, if a farmer has a combine harvester from John Deere and an implement from Claas, these technologies do not communicate with each other, but also at the platform level. We can also see a high degree of fragmentation. So unlike other sectors where there's usually one platform, we can see many different platforms in agriculture. And while maybe at the first sight we want this from a competition perspective, this is highly unpractical for farmers in reality because they have to navigate these different platforms, and this actually loses in efficiencies. So in our research, we asked how does platformization, so the emergence of platforms in a sector, unfold in digital agriculture, and how does it differ from other sectors? And we conducted, for this particular research, 12 expert interviews with industry regulators and farming organizations. So, for example, we talked to multinational machinery companies like John Deere or Claas. We talked to agrochemical companies like Bayer, BASF, and Syngenta. We spoke to big tech companies like Google, Amazon Web Services, and Microsoft. And we spoke to farming organizations and policymakers. We also conducted 10 field observations of industry events, and we mapped out different networks of inter-firm relationships between agribusinesses and also big tech companies. So maybe a little bit for background, and what we can see is that these platforms are emerging in already consolidated market structures. So agriculture has oligopolistic market structures. Maybe some of you are acquainted with this. So there were 3 mega mergers around 10 years ago. So the most public one, or the most known one, is Bayer's acquisition of Monsanto, so an agrochemical company acquiring a seed company, but also ChemChina acquired Syngenta, and then Dow and DuPont merged and became Corteva. Apart from these 3 mega mergers, also what we can see is a lot of acquisitions of startups and vertical integration. So here just 2 examples, John Deere's acquisition of Blue River Technology, which allows spot spraying. So we can see that a machinery company actually moves also to some extent in agrochemical applications. And also Bear Flag Robotics, which is an automation, which helped John Deere to automate their combines. So what we can see is that there is a blurring of lines between seeds, agrochemicals, biotechnology, machinery, and digital agriculture, and that only a handful of firms control both inputs and digital infrastructure. So yeah, platform power builds on existing market concentration already. So this just for background knowledge. So yeah, what we can see is that digital platforms integrate into oligopolistic market structures on 2 fronts. So on the one side, the industry that I just mentioned, multinational upstream agribusinesses, they operate the data-driven farming, cropland farming platforms. And on the other side, we can also see that big tech provides the digital infrastructure, so in particular cloud computing and analytics to these agribusinesses. And here we mapped out the different strategic partnerships between big tech companies. So in the circle, you see Google Cloud, Amazon Web Services, and Microsoft Azure, and how they collaborate with, for example, Bayer's Climate Field Views on the down part, or John Deere, but also Syngenta. So we can see a strong collaboration between these 2 industries. And these 2 industries actually create mutual beneficial economic relationships for each other. So the multinational upstream agribusinesses, they benefit from these cloud computing and analytics. And the big tech actually move into the agricultural space. And what we can see is also that platforms in agriculture are not led by the disruptors, but by incumbent companies that are already very powerful. So through our interviews, we identified 4 strategic platform expansions. So winner takes most ambitions or network effects, lock-in strategies, startup dependency, and monetization challenges. So when it comes to the winner takes most ambitions and network effects, here we mapped out the different collaboration and competition dynamics amongst multinational upstream agribusinesses. So this visualization does not include any startups, but only the most powerful agricultural companies in the world. So for example, the green one on the top is John Deere's Operations Center. Next to it, the purple one is CropWise, which is owned by Syngenta, and down is Bayer's Climate Field View. So what we can see through this visualization is that a lot of collaboration happens. So John Deere collaborates also sometimes with competitors or agrochemical companies. But at the same time, what we can also see is that unlike other sectors where one winner takes all scenario takes place, so for example, if we think of transportation, Uber, or Airbnb and hospitality sector, what we can see is a lot of fragmentation, that there's a lot of platforms, but they don't communicate with each other. So yeah, each incumbent builds towards a dominance within its ecosystem, but no single winner emerges. I think it should be important to mention that maybe this is also a process, and maybe this might change. So I think all of these stakeholders at least anticipate a winner takes most scenario. Apart from this, we can also see the direct and indirect network effects. So the more farmers a platform join, the more valuable a platform gets, but also the more other stakeholders join a platform, the more valuable it gets. And we also identified lock-in strategies, both by agrochemical companies, but also by agricultural machinery companies. So agrochemical companies, what they practice is algorithmic self-preferencing, we called it. So for example, Bayer's Climate Field View, they only, when they give recommendations to farmers, they only recommend their own in-house products. There are some exceptions. BASF also sometimes recommends out-house products, so products from competitors. But in general, we can see this trend that the platforms that are owned by the agrochemical company only suggest their own products. And then also from machinery companies, we also identified some lock-ins. And these are strategic technical incompatibilities. So when a farmer uses mixed brand fleets, so machinery from different companies, which we can see here on the photo, for example, a class implement, a John Deere tractor, but also different tractors, these technologies do not communicate with each other, and this is because data is seen as a strategic asset, and also they want to create so-called ecosystems. It's a bit similar to what we know from Apple, where the iPhone works seamlessly with the Mac computer, and what we can also see in agriculture is that the same is happening, for example, with machinery. We also identified startup dependency. So startups drive innovation, but they depend on the incumbent ecosystems. So for example, if you log into John Deere's operation center from the perspective of a farmer, you can connect your John Deere equipment with up to 200 different companies, many of them being startups. But what we can also identify is that none of the startups that are available, it's a bit like a Play Store, none of these startups that are available there are competing with John Deere, for example. So platform access is possible, but only if it aligns with the business model of each incumbent firm. We also identified monetization challenges. So most of these digital platforms are not profitable on their own, but instead they are financed, cross-financed through their core business. So Bayer's Climate Field View is financed through the sale of agrochemicals and seeds. John Deere Operations Center is financed through the machinery. And of course, what we can see here is that these platforms are a strategic complement and not standalone products. And I think this is very important when we talk about interoperability and improving interoperability, that actually these companies often don't have an incentive for that. Yeah, and these dynamics have implications for the sector. So what we can see or assume is that platform ecosystems, they risk reinforcing market concentration. As I mentioned already, the agriculture sector is already highly concentrated with only a few companies dominating. As a consequence, farmers' autonomy is undermined by closed proprietary data systems, so farmers will likely become more dependent on these platforms, but also on these companies. But we also identified some innovation bottlenecks that emerged due to the selective data access. So I showed you the fragmented platforms. So we can also see a lot of innovation bottlenecks because these different technologies and platforms do not communicate with each other, and it makes it very inefficient in farmers' daily life. And then, startups also struggle to survive. So what we can see is that they don't disrupt the market, but they complement the business strategies of already very powerful companies. So the governance of digital agriculture sits between two risks. So on the one side, we can see the winner-takes-all dominance, as we could see in other sectors like Uber or Airbnb, where one platform emerged as the dominant one. The question is whether this is happening or whether fragmentation happens that blocks innovations. So some takeaways, and I'm sure my colleagues, your panel colleagues here will also go into more detail. So true interoperability requires confronting strategic incentives, and platforms restrict access. That's, I think, a very important point. Platforms restrict access not due to technical limits, but to protect business model. So the challenge is to level the playing field without breaking it apart. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Monia, for that overview. I feel you articulate so well the challenges that we often see in the agricultural sector regarding interoperability. And now I will invite Can Atik to present his overview of the regulatory and governance aspects before we take a more of a scaled approach back. So please.
I will be more comfortable by standing.
Yeah.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear? Yeah.
Yes.
I will be speaking about agricultural data governance in Europe. It's a kind of general framework of regulations and developments. Immediately after a very nice presentation by Monia, to show you the general overview. So maybe it's better to start explaining the prominent issues when it comes to data access and sharing in agricultural setting. The first prominent one is data lock-in problem. It's just like online platforms. Farmers are locked in the first digital service provider or machinery manufacturer. And there are two underlying reasons. The first is legal ambiguities, the status of agricultural data, whether GDPR applies here or Data Act now applies here, or to what extent we can apply these provisions to port data to another provider. The another one is technical barriers, interoperability issues. Sometimes data standards are not the same. And due to these issues, we observe that data sets are controlled by fragmented data silos by different companies, especially the big ones, as Monia explained. So we have a kind of potential of big agricultural data, but due to this fragmentation, we are missing this potential. So another point is data access puzzle. There are multiple stakeholders in farm-to-fork chain. So data sets can be reused for innovative purposes. It's not limited with data-driven prescriptions to farmers. It can be used for any other purpose in any segment in the chain. But due to this fragmentation, isolation, so we have, again, this another issue of data reuse. Data access seekers are struggling to access data, whether they are even existing or not. And due to all of these ambiguities, we also have trust-related issues. It's both about the farmers' trust to the digitalization, but also it's about incentives of data holders, whether they face a problem if they share data, if they renounce their exclusive control over data. So due to all these reasons, there are discussions. And in agricultural setting, they really like to use the data ownership concept. I object this terminology, but yeah, the discussion is these problems should be regulated, but the question is how? As you know, EU has been really active in regulation of digital technologies, and these are mostly horizontal interventions. And specific to data, we have multiple frameworks, but I will focus more on the Data Act application. And also I will mention the Common European Agricultural Data Space very briefly, and also I will explain the potential of voluntary rulemaking, a code of conduct, till a follow-up sector-specific regulation arrives, if there will be, of course. We don't have any sign yet. Data Act is a regulation, unlike the GDPR. The purpose is unlocking the competition and promoting innovation. And we have we have multiple chapters, but when it comes to data access, we have Article 3, 4, and 5, and it's basically access by design, access by request, and sharing by request. So manufacturers of IoT products will have to design their systems directly accessible to the user. And if not, always users can request access, and of course they can also share data to another platform upon request. And the most important emphasis, I think, in this design is the continuously and real-time emphasis. And also it's free of charge for the users, although there are some provisions to the data recipients pay reasonable compensation, so that can be indirectly linked to the end users. So we have some general limitations of the Data Act, but more specifically, I want to emphasize the definition of the user. It's the owner of the IoT product or kind of long-term user, kind of leaser of the IoT device. But in agricultural setting, sometimes machinery is used commonly via cooperatives. They can also hire a company that conduct agricultural operation without buying or leasing the machine itself. So there are some application issues, but even though all these kind of small limitations, we have a really useful framework after the Data Act. We will have data access and sharing rights for users of IoT devices, so farmers who own or lease the machinery. And but the other data collection methods, apart from the machine use or IoT device use, is outside the scope of this design, and also there is no any statement regarding reuse of data. So apart from this Data Act initiative, the Commission is also planning to create a common European agricultural data space to create a kind of catalog of data sets. It will be a decentralized platform. Existing data sharing initiatives will be active in the central data access hub. So it's nice, especially for the data access puzzle problem. As I've mentioned, the access seekers are not aware of the data sets they seek, whether they are ready or controlled by whom. So this platform can be really useful. Apart from these horizontal regulations that can be applied in agriculture, we may have follow-up interventions. This can be by a kind of regulation for agricultural data, or maybe we can see a regulation for common European agricultural data space that may have some provisions to fill the gaps that I have mentioned. Because we already saw a sample from the health data space. Commission already released the proposal for a regulation. But in either way, I think the solution should be based on a kind of trilogy. The first one is a functional legal framework, not limited to users' rights, but also mentioning a kind of guidelines for data reuse in the farm to fork chain. And plus, we need to have a more functional solution regarding standards and interoperability. Data Act has a section titled interoperability, but it refers to the data space interoperability. It's not about an obligation of machinery manufacturers to reach a kind of interoperable environment. So a possible follow-up intervention should take into account more seriously to ensure the machines and services can be used smoothly in the farm setting. And finally, common European agricultural data space as a data governance infrastructure is a really important framework to facilitate especially the data reuse. Regarding the data reuse, it's really complicated issue because there are multiple actors. Their incentives may sometimes conflict. And we have two extreme options. One of them is exclusive control, which is basically the de facto situation. It's not nice because it limits the potential, limits the innovation. But on the other hand, if we open up all the data reuse opportunities without a cost, then there will be no incentive for the data holders. There will be free riding by rivals. So we need to set a balance in between, but it's not an easy task. We need to identify, kind of map out the different incentives, conflicting ones if there are. And we need to think about the conditions, data access conditions based on the access seekers' position, whether they are small enterprises, startups, whether they are potential rivals, direct rivals, or impartial party from the data holder. There are different discussions in the, for instance, there is essential facilities doctrine in competition law that can be used as a kind of starting point when thinking about these different scenarios. So these are my publications, and I hope I can provide the general overview of regulations and governance framework in agriculture. Thanks.
Great. Thank you so much, Chan. That was a really, really great overview of the various regulations. And now I invite Elena to present some of the actions happening on a national level within the Netherlands.
Okay.
Take the chance. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. As already introduced, I will try to bring in the perspective of the Dutch Ministry of Agriculture on some data governance issues. In particular, I will very fast touch upon some of the aspects we have to take into consideration as a government for the implementation of acts like the Data Act, with a particular focus on monitoring what happens around us in society, how society is receiving certain new regulations. I decided to focus on a couple of concepts that keep coming up and that, in my view, plays an important role in the debate about finding a balance between innovation, control, collaboration, and I end up with a thought about what could be at the center, or at least an aspect of the debate. So the Data Act, as Jen said, is a horizontal regulation. This means that, in principle, it's not about agriculture. Nonetheless, it has an impact. And the first task for member states is to look into the regulation. Okay, it's horizontal, who does what? In the Act, there are numbers of regulations, or let's say, despite it is directly applicable, there are a number of actions that need to be taken. For example, identify the supervisory authority that will make sure that the Act is implemented, but also establish dispute settlement bodies when necessary. Promote awareness, which is a very important task because these topics are very difficult for us, even more for the sector. And if they don't understand it, the situation is hardly going to change. Data literacy is one of the challenges we are mostly struggling with. Digital skills, in our case, it's not, for example, for farmers, we as a government see potentiality in the use of digital technologies for agriculture. However, the lack of skills may result in even greater difficulty to access the sector. And even more opportunities for vulnerabilities, exploitation. But here I would like to focus on an aspect that it is in the Data Act. So the Data Act says that it is for member states to monitor what's happening around them. And this actually, it's very important for me because it is from here that we can also take input for supplementary laws, sectorial. So Data Act is horizontal, but we might see, looking at what happens around, okay, there is a clear problem, we can intervene, but we need to first look what's going on. And here are some of, let's say, technological or commercial developments that have also already been mentioned. One is data spaces, which actually, it's not a technical term, is used in various ways. One is to indicate a space where the farmer has all its data, and it is a bit of an ideal because at the moment data are, as it has been said, fragmented in multiple databases. So there is this new idea, farmers should have a space where all their data are so that they are in control. Another idea is that of data spaces in European dimension, and here it's actually more about a structure, organizational, but also infrastructure to connect various platforms or various databases where, or data sharing initiatives, so are called, where the various data are linked. Another development is that of data intermediary services, and this is also very, very interesting. Now, data intermediary services is a bit more specific than just platforms because it's actually about platforms that whose focus is mostly help parties sell or, in any case, share data. So in principle, they are not there to sell their products or to sell seeds or to gather data about what farmers are doing in their fields, but it is mostly and merely about helping the parties to share data. And this is a concept that is very dear to the European Union, and they try to regulate it in the Data Governance Act for multiple reasons. One was to impose some conditions that would increase the trust in this kind of mechanism. The idea is that if there is a neutral intermediary, then maybe parties are more likely to share data. Also interesting, the point of price. Of course, these platforms, as Monia said, has a monetization issue to make it more appealing. The idea is that the price should be limited to the data intermediary services. If they also want to sell other services, then this has to be optional, just on request, and certainly not a good reason to make a higher price. Continuity, it's also a very interesting point, I think, because very often you put data into a service, and then what happens if it goes bankrupt? You lose all your data. This is actually not the kind of reliability that farmers need. Interoperability, but Seth will say more about it. And also, I think, very important, the aspect of fraud prevention and prevention of unlawful access. And this is also a topic that it's not very much discussed. Who is responsible for what? I use your services, are you also protecting me? So this is one of those topics that would need more attention. But so the point is that these developments all seems to focus on we want to ensure that farmers have more control over the data, which it's actually not where everyone else wants to go for innovation. For innovation, we need more data, openness. And so it's quite interesting to see that this is the development. And the reason is because, as it has been mentioned, there is a problem of trust. And so the first thought is, okay, if you don't trust me, I have to grant you control. I have to promise you will remain in control of your data. This brought to another development that I find very interesting, a new concept, or maybe an old one applied to a new context, that of data sovereignty. Data sovereignty usually is used to indicate the powers, the absolute power of a state respect to the other states around. It is about supreme power, autonomy, power above all. And applied to data, it's actually something new, because it's not in the Data Act, it's not in the Data Governance Act. So it seems a bit, in my view, a way to start again to talk about data ownership. John said data ownership, it is a concept that we heard, the debate was very lively, and then it moved. It moved because it was also difficult to solve, and also because it came out, well, the problem is not the ownership. The problem is how are we going to share the data? What would actually mean own the data? What do we want, actually? And so, in my view, this is also interesting, and here also we see a push towards this idea of more control that we have to take into consideration. Another very interesting concept, in my view, is that of personal data applied to farm data. I say it's interesting because I see it very often talking also in papers about private farmers' privacy concerns, but it's never explained exactly what it is about. It's a bit assumed, and if you read in details, you see that actually it's not about privacy. Actually, the concerns are about commercial data that are not personal. And then some explain this reference to privacy with respect to non-personal data because farmers usually have a sense of identity with their business, and so they think, hey, this is my business, this is my data. And then also, there are certainly many cases in which data collected on farm are also personal data. But in my view, this is important, first of all, because it's another way to say, this is my data, I should be in control of this. But this creates legal uncertainty. And for example, Jan explained, we have the Data Act. The Data Act applies to non-personal data. But there are aspects that do not fall under the Data Act. The data sharing dynamics in agriculture are very rich, and they are not limited to machine-generated data. So what about those data that are not personal data? So in my view, it would be important to clarify this aspect. Am I still? Yeah,
I think
sorry.
1 minute.
Okay. So very fast, because I thought, okay, maybe it's good to make an example. Personal data, you probably know very well. It is about data that identify a person or can allow to identify a person. And it's also about data that relate to a person. And this concept, it's one that can create confusion. What does it mean, relate to? And there is case law that actually not related to farm data, but explain a bit better what it means, relate to a person. This is an interesting case in which the answers that a person gave to a professional exam were considered, so answer about a topic, I think it was accountancy, were considered personal data because they were used to evaluate the person. The information in the answers had nothing to do with the person itself, but the purpose for which it was used made them fall under the category of personal data. So then I thought, okay, all this confusion about personal data, what if we apply the same concept to data about the use of pesticides? What can we assume if we use data about the use of pesticides to evaluate the practices of a farmer? Does this make data about the use of pesticides personal data? And the same for animal health. If we have data about animal health and this suggests that the animals are not healthy, can we assume anything about what the farmer is doing? Well, is it a one farmer company or more farmers companies? And what about if it's robots that do automatically the actions? So this is just to say, I think it would help indeed to explore a little more this concept, but at the same time, I'm not so sure that for farmers it really matters whether it is personal data or not. In principle, they don't like the intrusion. They don't like the intrusion of within their business, and so. Again said, I don't want not to solve the problem of personal data, or not to think about it. However, in my view, it would be very important to focus on remedies that can be offered to farmers if the way in which their data are processed cause a harm to them. This is not my idea, by the way. I was really very much inspired by Professor Portova that talked about well, very interesting article. I would suggest the article is about the GDPR becoming the law of everything. But I think it's something that would be very important because in all this discussion about innovation and promises that the data economy can create, there is not enough discussion about what can I do for you if things goes bad. Okay, this can scare you, but maybe you're happier if I tell you if something goes bad, I can help you. And in my view, this is something that deserves to be discussed further, and that could be indeed at the base of finding a balance between interests. To find a balance, I need to know where is the worst. What is the worst that can happen? And then I can see how I can raise from that, how I can mitigate it. Yeah, so this is my take on the problem.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Elena. That is a very interesting concept to also know the boundaries of what we mean by personal data and how it is in employed and applied in the agricultural sector. It also gets interesting when you start to think of farmers as legal persons and also natural persons. There's a lot of dichotomy in that field. But for now, we'll speak a little bit more about interoperability, and I invite Seth to present his talk. Thank you.
Thank you, Pia. So I hope that you're still, let's say, awake at the end of this very long day. So congratulations. I'll just try to focus a little bit on interoperability, which was mentioned by the colleagues on stage. I come a little bit more from, let's say, a technological angle. So I think we had an overview of, let's say, the socio-economic, policy and legal context. And so I'll just try to delve a little bit deeper into kind of what interoperability can bring to the discussion, but also highlight a little bit the, let's say, the complexity. Interoperability is a word a little bit like world peace. Everyone likes it, everyone wants it, but well, it's not that easy to grasp or to achieve. I think it's very often more kind of an aspirational endeavor. But I think there are lots of different definitions of interoperability, but at the heart, we're really talking about how two entities, being a human or a machine, can exchange data. And in order to do so, very often we rely on standards and protocols. So if I plug my 2 fingers into an electricity plug, voilà, I won't be asking myself what is the exact quality or the type of electricity I'll get. Voilà, decades, or I would say centuries of negotiation went into this process of making sure we have electricity or gas or water as a basic utility under a standardized, commodified form. And I think as a society, more and more, there's also an understanding that voilà, data are becoming let's say, should become available as a basic utility. Or also, just like with gas, electricity, water, you have a complex intertwining between public and private investments. But when we talk about standards and standardization processes, so I come from, let's say, a very boring niche scientific field called documentation science, where you have like the classic toothbrush joke. Standards are like a toothbrush. Everyone thinks it's a good idea and everyone wants one, but no one wants to use someone else's. So I think that has been the problem from the beginning of standards development, but in particular now, there's just a multitude, a plethora of standards in parallel next to one another. You have meta-standards, meta-standards, so it's becoming increasingly complex. And I think here I copied an image of Monja's presentation to just also highlight a little bit, like somewhere you see in the top left bubble, the crop-wise Syngenta ecosystem. So Syngenta, for example, is now one of the editors or co-editors of an important, let's say, ISO standardization track. But let's say, voilà, the process has just started. I don't want to say anything about the content or like the validity or the quality of the work. But inherently, standards are not neutral. I think there's since 10, 20 years, you have a thriving academic discipline highlighting that standards and protocols are never neutral. There are always politics, always economic incentives driving them. So just this very first slide to just say, okay, everyone wants interoperability. It's highlighted as, let's say, a key objective to reach. However, in practice, it is often challenging. And just, no one has like magic answers. The only, I would say, or what I would like to discuss over the next few slides is just a kind of a framework to look at interoperability in a kind of from different angles, to just dissect a little bit the problem or the problem zones from different, from different perspectives. And so at the Commission, voilà, there's this EIF, European Interoperability Framework, which basically chops down the interoperability challenge across legal, organizational, semantic, and technical level, and I'll just use this kind of structure to give some concrete, tangible examples of the interoperability challenges in the agri-food sector. Just from a legal perspective, so I speak from, let's say, a public sector perspective at the Commission or the EU has issued different, let's say, sector-specific legislative initiatives. So we've heard about the horizontal initiatives, Data Act, Data Governance Act, but there's also, let's say, a whole army or a collection of sector-specific legislation. Probably no one here in the room has heard about the farm sustainability data network or integrated farm statistics. Those are just very large-scale initiatives to collect data on farming practices, often related to the CAP subsidy, let's say, program. But even just if you look at those different legislations, which sometimes come from the perspective of DG Agri, sometimes from the angle of ESTAT, the legislations actually sometimes have just a different interpretation of what is exactly a farm. Either it's considered as a kind of an economical unit, either it's being looked at from a kind of a very operational perspective. And one of the biggest challenges that we're trying to grasp now as we speak is having a kind of or going towards a better common understanding of actually what is a farm. It sounds really silly or extremely straightforward, but it's not. Like, for what is considered formally a farm in Romania is not the same thing as what is considered a farm in Germany or in Italy, for example. The size, the type of activities which are formally acknowledged as being a farm activity are different from one member state to the other, especially in Germany. Even within, there's a very complex federal approach. But so one of the things that we're kind of looking at to circumvent the lack of consistency on, let's say, what do we consider actually a farm, is to leverage the whole EIDAS 2.0, let's say, framework, and the connection with the work being done on the EU business wallet, and try to use that to go towards, let's say, a little bit more a technological mean to have unique identifiers for farm, at least at EU level. Also, very often, sector-specific legislation is extremely stringent on what you can use or what you can do with the data. And I would say in all cases, you can only use the data for this very specific purpose of the legislation, which makes complete sense. But if, like, from the perspective of the data governance unit, we're thinking about, well, how can we reduce administrative burden by coupling data streams, well, that type of work that we want to put in place, it's not always possible due to these types of restrictions from a legal perspective. And so then on the level of the organizational interoperability, this is really like the level where you're trying to put organizations together who have, let's say, a common objective, but not necessarily a common agenda. And you try to align or to bring or to make it clear, okay, your business processes are very similar. You have common goals that you want to reach and to bring them together. And in this context, very often, also at an EU level, but also at a national level, you have this once-only principle of trying to, let's say, collect and store in one single place data. And then if you need them for different business processes across your administration, to use that one-stop shop to refer to the data. But then, and this is a little bit my domain, the semantic on interoperability, this is really ensuring that between humans, but especially between machines, that you agree on a common syntax, a common grammar, but that you also have the same shared meaning or semantics of what you mean by a farm, what you mean with soil, what is drought, etc. And so again, very often these things seem self-evident, but in practice they're not very often. Voilà, there's so many differences between member states, even within member states. Lots of complexities, different definitions, which are a blocking factor to actually create new innovative, let's say, services, again, to kind of to reduce administrative burden for farmers. And here, at the end of the day, here the conference today or this week is also talking about AI. I would say one of the big debates currently on the level of semantics is, I would say, the AI enthusiasts are saying, okay, voila, actually there's no longer a need to put 10 experts on plants in a room and you don't leave them out before they have a consensus on a classification. We now have enough data, you just let the algorithm run and it will churn out, let's say, a model by itself. You have the believers and the non-believers. Personally, I'm a little bit kind of in the middle. But I think there will definitely be a lot of kind of value in automating or trying to automate the classification and the data model building work, which is very often extremely time consuming. And also for, let's say, I think also the public sector here, and especially also EU level data, the aggregated data sets that we have, which are of good quality, could be an important kind of building block to be put into these machine learning systems. Then just on a kind of on a technical level, and I hope I don't kind of bore everyone in the room, but I'll be short. Let's say here we really speak about what are the common formats, what is the common grammar in between machines that we can agree upon. And here also from a kind of an identity perspective, there's lots of extremely exciting work on, for example, self-sovereign identity for individuals, for organizations, for tractors, for fields, what have you. But I think there's a lot of opportunities that we currently see from, let's say, so colleagues at DG Grow are rolling out a legislative framework on digital product passports, which are targeted towards the textiles industry and batteries. So the agri-food sector was explicitly not included within this legislative track. However, the technical work on setting up a digital product passport, and especially like the United Nations have developed a transparency protocol to kind of formalize a little bit the minimal handshakes all of the entities across a supply chain need to make one another. That is really, let's say, an approach that could also be of a lot of value for the agri-food sector. And if I'm in a supermarket and I have, I don't know, a yogurt-based whatever salad in front of me, I have a QR code and I can immediately spot, let's say, the different ingredients, from where were they sourced, what is the sustainable, let's say, benchmarking score of the different farms involved. If I can directly have access to that type of information, that is definitely kind of an interesting thing from a consumer perspective. But so over the years to come, I think a lot of the work which is currently taking place in complex supply chains could also be of value in the agri-food sector. But there again, interoperability and trying to do it in a lightweight, pragmatic way will be really important. And of course, this will also be connected to how we use, for example, the wallet. But perhaps just, I think the more interesting elements also for the discussion, I hope some of you have some kind of questions that you want to raise. So as I said in the beginning, interoperability is like world peace. We're not going to get there full option tomorrow. So it's a very long, never-ending process. But you can focus on low-hanging fruits. So for example, and again, to many people, this sounds like super obvious, but there is no, at EU level, a common agreed crop list. So depending on the service, or the DG that you talk with, they will use different classifications for how do you describe wheat, what types of barley do you have. And so this is kind of an activity that we're currently funding and supporting. I would call that, let's say, a kind of a low-hanging fruit. And then also just from a very kind of, let's say, an abstract perspective, I think across, regardless of from what angle you look at IT, if it's from a legal, an economical perspective, there has always been this kind of pendulum going from centralization to decentralization over the last 40 years, or ever since that kind of the web or even the internet kicked off. So there's very happy to see the decentralized sticker, or I would say there's a lot of effort now on going back to a certain form of decentralization to have more sovereignty, more autonomy, to also to avoid having a context where a very limited amount of players in the platforms are setting up the whole, let's say, infrastructure for data exchange. But I think if you just want, you can, if you just use, if you purely have a technological perspective, you can decentralize everything, give everything completely self-sovereign identities. But from a public sector perspective, if you try to sell that type of application to, let's say, a public servant managing a business register, I think that's kind of a bridge too far. So probably in the years to come, we'll see, what I personally find interesting is to see mixed models where, let's say, you embrace the some of the self-sovereign techniques, but you still put somewhere in the middle a government or non-governmental trust answer. So all of those are very big debates, and which are, well, there's not really any consensus, but I think in the years to come, or if you're a scholar, those are really things to focus on. And then just the last element, of course, everyone's talking about generative AI. From a public sector perspective, we really need to make sure that the data that we have, which are of good quality, where we really looked at biases, etc., that we can kind of contribute those to the models to just ensure that the quality of these services is as good as possible. Voilà, just kind of a brief overview of a little bit like the interoperability angle, and very much looking forward to any questions that you have at this stage. Or giving back the floor to Pia.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. I also want to thank Seth, first of all, for bringing up the issue of food and agri-foods also within this data spectrum. So part of the sponsor behind this panel is the Data for Food 2030 project. We're also working on a monitoring system. But before we work for the question and discussion, how about we give a round of applause for our wonderful panelists for presenting their excellent research. And I'm really happy with this context, because at CPDP we speak so much about data protection, we speak so much about different platforms, and we always speak it with regard to personal data. But the world is getting more complicated, with everything getting increasingly datafied. The lines of personal data are changing, and they're also emerging in different sectors, and there's different challenges arising with non-personal data. I think probably one of my favorite points brought up in this is that in data scholarship and in legal scholarship, we always speak about data as the new oil. It's monetized, it's valuable, and in Monia's research, she brought up the issue that it's a strategic asset, yet it's not well monetized. And I'm wondering if I could invite the panel to discuss a little bit on how can you attain this value in agri-food data, or is there even potential, or is its monetization simply for more societal use or environmental use? Like where do you envision the value of data in this sector? And anyone can be welcome to start.
Well, I think a lot is unknown. So I think a lot of data in agriculture, digital agriculture is emerging, and there are also a lot of business cases that might not be there yet. So companies that collect data right now use it as a strategic asset because they also don't know, oh, maybe we can use this type of data. This doesn't have any value yet, but maybe in 10 years, and when we know more about microbes in soil sensors, right? In soils, for example. So yeah, I think also to move away, like agrochemical companies, I think this is a very interesting case because the idea of digital agriculture is to reduce inputs. And one could argue, well, the incentive, why would have an agrochemical company the incentive to reduce inputs? Like, how are they going to make their sales? So what we can see is like a service-based model. So companies are moving away from selling large volumes of agrochemicals and instead like selling service-based outcomes. So for example, what we can see is BASF, they have a business model where they say, if you follow all our advice, we ensure you 80% of leaf health. So this is about crop protections. I think it's important to say this is not about yields because I think even these very powerful companies don't want to go there yet that they ensure a certain amount of yields. But what we can see, I think, is a shift from product sales to service sales. But still, I'm not sure to what extent also these platforms are profitable. And also speaking to these different stakeholders, many of them also said they do struggle. And I think many of them anticipate, these winner takes most or all outcomes. And if you are then the one leading platforms, I mean, if like platform economy is often similar, right? Like Netflix, it was very cheap. And once it became the dominant platform in Europe, I would say they raised their prices. So this could be something that could happen. And how do we anticipate this? But yeah, so far, these are like the monetization strategies I have observed so far.
I will intervene a little bit. I think one of the interesting things I heard at STS conferences where a lot of society, technology, and science scholars speak about a soil as an object of study, and the value of soil and the biosphere really emerged after people started recording data. So sometimes the value of the data is what you learn from the environment around it. Also, don't forget, audience, if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to ask. Actually, I might go to Etsky right away. But we need this for the recording, so I'll bring it over.
Thank you. Ezgi Ercan, I'm from Timelex. Thank you very much for your contributions. Honestly, this was probably one of the most interesting panels I've joined so far. I was wondering if you've looked into also the intersection between the agricultural sector and other sectors, and if this poses additional challenges or if it facilitates some of the questions that you've raised. For instance, there are agrivoltaics technologies that allow dual use, not those that kind of prevent agriculture, but those that run on plant data that allow the dual use of land for agriculture and also energy production. For instance, do you think, I mean, you covered quite a lot of points during the panel discussions. Do you think the intersections between agricultural use cases and those that combine different sectors pose additional challenges or facilitate some of the challenges? I would be very interested in hearing your opinion on maybe some use cases like this one or some others that you can think of, if that's not a question that's completely out of scope, of course.
Thank you so much, Ezgi, and it's a very kind compliment that you gave us. I don't know, maybe... Is that you?
So it's an excellent question. And so, for example, in the context of the data spaces, there's SEAT, the deployment of the agricultural data space, but there's also the Green Deal data space, and there's also the mobility data space. And so one of the elements that we've been kind of brainstorming about informally with colleagues or stakeholders is, for example, how we could put together a monitoring system for early drought by combining mobility, agricultural and climate environmental data. So it's definitely on our radar, and it does bring some interoperability challenges because data are sometimes formatted differently. But already, I think it's just a nice, I'd say, it just obliges us to take those challenges into account. And so I think there are lots of very interesting research and societal questions that we can only tackle by connecting agricultural data to other sectors. So I hope in 1 or 2 years that we have put together specific use cases. Voilà.
Yes.
Add, sorry.
Anybody wants.
Here. Okay, thank you. Maybe from my perspective, I can share that within the Ministry of Agriculture, we very often cooperate with other ministries. For example, in the Netherlands, water management is a matter of the Ministry of Infrastructures. And so very often it is worked upon, comes up the topic about aligning data needs. And of course, this opens all sorts of questions in terms of to what extent data can be shared, but also technical questions, what it is needed to streamline data sharing between public authorities. So maybe it's not a use case, but a lot is going on. And it's true, what I'm saying is also depends very much on the way in which competences are shared among ministries. But definitely food, nature, water, they all have an impact on many aspects. And the same data about agriculture businesses are relevant also for the Ministry of Economic Affairs, for example, to do their own statistics. So definitely there is a lot of room for cooperation.
Perfect. And the gentleman in the front?
Yeah, thanks a lot. I want to echo that comment. I was really thrilled to see this panel, and I really enjoyed the effective presentations. I'm Thomas Schreins. I'm at the European University Institute, and I work on data law, beyond data protection law, so this is very close to my heart. And I have a question that is kind of targeting the different panelists, like not in a friendly way. So for Seth, because you kept saying that everyone wants interoperability, but I'm not so sure. So I hear that a lot across sectors, but when you look closely, it's often claimed that you want interoperability, but you actually use all the features that you highlighted to not want interoperability. So I was wondering if in this space, agriculture, there are also instances where we actually don't want interoperability from a public policy perspective. And for Karnatik, your presentation was a lot about the interactions between the different legislative frameworks. And I was wondering if you could expand on that. So how should we go about this? Is it better to think about that from the sectoral perspective and let that drive the conversation on interoperability between legislative regimes? Or does it make more sense to think about it from a principled or a constitutional law perspective? And for Monia and Elena, if I can put you two together, because I felt you were talking about platformization, data concentration, data value, and I'd like you to expand a bit on that technological and data sovereignty aspect, because I think it's really important in the current geopolitical context. So is it better in this context to bet on data sharing to reduce concentration, even if that also means data sharing transnationally, or do we need a more closed European data space for agricultural data? And I see huge tensions there, also in light of the agricultural sector being very transnational, but unevenly transnational. So I'd love to hear reactions.
Okay. I guess I will ask all panelists to answer the questions. I think that was very great. And maybe just add a little bit, I think, Seth, you brought this in our pre-discussions. What is your vision going forward so that we can wrap up perhaps cohesively? You can maybe do one and one and one, and then we can go back and forth. Please.
But fantastic question, but I propose that it will be easier to discuss this in person because it's highly political, but fully agree with your observation. let's say, I don't have a one-liner ready. I was very pleasantly surprised by the question and looking forward to debate.
Yeah, I can comment on this regulation-related question. Yeah, I mean, as I demonstrated in the presentation, EU has already been really active in multiple regulations, so there are also criticisms against this kind of over-regulation. But these regulations are all horizontal design. Maybe in ideal scenario, it's expected that these horizontal solutions would also solve the sectoral issues, but there are remaining points, even though they are somehow small. But still, my envision is like that Data Act will apply this September, and we will observe the consequences. And plus, in agricultural data sharing setting, there is also an experience of EU Code of Conduct on non-binding voluntary rules. And I know that the stakeholders are working on it to update. Maybe we can observe the situation after the Data Act enforcement, plus maybe filling the gap with sectoral principles. And also we will have Common European Agricultural Data Space. So in all these, let's say, building blocks, we will observe the consequences. And if there will be a clear market failure, then there can be a kind of opportunity for sector-specific regulation. But of course, it's not desirable.
Okay. Yeah, sure. Wait, to re-go back, it was about data sovereignty. Maybe it was the one of the topics you also mentioned, the technical aspect. So this is my point of view. Given the high-level discussion that is often, or maybe most of the case, done about data sharing and innovation, I don't feel personally comfortable saying go for it without a concrete example. It would be much easier for me, much more tangible, much easier to build trust on, to start with use cases. And it doesn't have to be a use case between me and you. It could be a use case between even governmental authority that has a particular policy needs, because of course we are interested as well in gathering data. But it is easier also for us to start with a concrete question and look into what are your risks, what are my risks, what are the risks for societies, because ultimately it is our role to balance between the multiple roles, being neutral, and achieve our policy objectives. So my point of view is that we need a more, first, a more specific, concrete discussion, and then it can be more easily talked about data sharing. But remaining so high level, I'm definitely not comfortable to just go for more data sharing. But yeah.
Yeah, I can align with this. I'm not a lawyer, but what I can say is that what I've learned from my research, how deeply complex this is, and I think really the danger that I'm worried about is that when we regulate the space, which I think needs to be done, but how we regulate is the question, that we might get unintended consequences and make maybe already powerful players more powerful, or also, like my visualization with big tech moving into agriculture, maybe paving the way for these companies to become even more powerful in agriculture. So yeah, this would be maybe my closing statement on this.
Well, fantastic. And I don't know if we got all questions for the audience, but of course you're welcome to, I mean, we're the last session. It's easy to approach us right now. Thank you so much for attending. I know it's been a very long day. It's already the second day of CPDP, but we're very, very happy to share this with you and give more texture and understanding to this world of data governance, apply it to a field. And I hope it's been interesting. And I also want to give a great round of applause for our panel again for the great contribution. And thank you so much.
And the moderator.